maybe you can tell us first who you are, where you work,
Okay.
and could you tell us a bit about stigma and criminalization within drug users?
Okay, within drug users. Okay, my name's Erika Thompson, and I work for Women's Resource Society of the Fraser Valley at the program called the Warm Zone. So it's a drop-in center for many women who are street engaged, and what that looks like is all sorts of reasons: poverty, or drug use, or mental health and housing issues of the sort. Many of the women I work with have extreme burden of stigma and discrimination, and most often we see it within the health care or criminal justice system. So health and safety supports are inadequate and not equitably accessible for a lot of the women I work with. And I find it's more so the major impact is the stigma, basically on being a woman who's often deemed by society as being more deviant, rejecting her place or gender role, so unfit mothers due to again society's impression of how a woman should be. So most of the women I work with have had a lot of harm systemically and personally on those levels. And harm reduction for me is that there's no quite cookie cutter solution to a lot of these issues that we see at the moment, until we make some really big changes and we stop criminalizing people for where they're at around their drug use or their sex work. That's those two things. There seems to be this moral bias that's always put onto people, and it usually affects the most marginalized or vulnerable people, and not so much of an upper class, because usually you don't see or have a lot of harm done in that area due to the status and the economic imbalance. So yeah, and harm reduction comes into places, for people do things for all sorts of reasons, and they often get judged for it, yet we don't know enough about it, and we do not have enough systems in place that are long-term and help people, be able to access the services that should be equal, but they're not. So harm reduction is not necessarily, I think people get really caught up in this, needle distribution or things like that, and that's not harm reduction. Sometimes just being able to lay down and have a quiet, safe place to sleep is harm reduction, and we forget about that. And so we get very caught up in little pieces of it and don't see the broader picture. And yeah, harm reduction to me is the greatest act of love. It's about, supporting people where they're at and loving them for who they are, and trying to suspend our own frame of reference or bias that we carry and what we've learned, right, conditioned, and how we perceive people. So it's a little bit.